Our opening thought comes from Kate Rayworth from Donut Economics. Humanity's 21st century challenge is to meet the needs of all within the means of the planet. In other words, to ensure that no one falls short on life's essentials, from food and housing to healthcare and political voice, while ensuring that collectively we do not overshoot our pressure on Earth's life-supporting systems, on which we fundamentally depend, such as a stable climate, fertile soils, and a protective ozone layer. Our first reading comes from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, their Planetary Health Check from 2025. I was looking at this online this week, and 5 minutes after I was reading this, I got a friend request on Facebook from a staff person from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Okay. Meta is in my phone, apparently. This is from their 2025 health check. More than 3/4 of the Earth's support systems are not in the safe zone. Humanity is pushing beyond the limits of a safe operating space, increasing the risk of destabilizing the planet, says PIK Director Johan Rockström. The 7 breached boundaries are climate change, biosphere integrity, land system change, freshwater use, biogeochemical flows, novel entities, which is basically pollution, and ocean acidification. We just passed that one out of the safe zone in 2025. All of these 7 boundaries show worsening trends. Another reading from the Planetary Health Check from 2025. This is from Hindal Umaru Ibrahim. Indigenous peoples have safeguarded forests, water, and biodiversity by living within nature's limits, guided by knowledge passed from our ancestors. Today, the planetary boundaries science confirms what indigenous peoples have always known. When we push beyond these limits, we put all life at risk. To heal our planet, we must unite science and traditional knowledge, respecting the wisdom of those who live closest to the land and waters. Interestingly enough, of the planetary boundaries, aerosol pollution is one of those areas where we've actually made progress, as well as one other area, and then the 7 other areas we're living beyond the boundaries. So as you've heard from the readings, scientists have identified actually 9 planetary boundaries that we should not cross if we would like to experience a sustainable future. And as you heard from the reading, we are currently surpassing 7 of the 9 boundaries, and it's going to be much more difficult to return to be within the boundaries than it would have been to have stayed within them in the first place. But that's the challenge of what we're facing today, is a real necessity to pull back from living beyond the planetary boundaries so that we can have a sustainable future. Well, let's look at those 9 planetary boundaries together. The first one is climate change, and that's one of the ones that we are living beyond the safe operating space in relation to. Climate change is driven by human activities that are disrupting the Earth's energy balance, particularly because of the emission of greenhouse gases, CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, and others into the atmosphere. The two variables that the planetary boundaries science is looking at are the concentration of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, as well as the extra amount of the sun's heat that's being trapped in the atmosphere because of these human activities. And we are far beyond the boundary in relation to this. In fact, there's just been some reports out this year that the pace at which the temperature, the global average temperature, is increasing is rapidly accelerating. So that's one way where we are living beyond the safe operating space. The second planetary boundary that is discussed is biospheric integrity. And this is looking at issues like loss of species, degradation of ecosystems, how well ecological functions are being sustained, and the overall state of the earth, how it's being regulated. And once again, we're living beyond safe operating space when it comes to biospheric integrity. As we talked about here in this space before, just in most of our lifetime, we've seen over a 70% decrease in the numbers of wildlife. We're seeing about 100 extinctions per million. That's much greater than the normal background rate. So when you look at these variables of species going extinct and the amount of energy humans are extracting from nature through harvesting, hunting, and fishing, damaging the functional integrity of the biosphere, we're definitely living beyond the safe operating space in relation to that boundary. A third boundary is related to land system change, the transformation of forests and grasslands and other natural areas through land use and human actions. A lot of this is agricultural in nature. The key variable that's being focused on here is the balance between natural ecosystems and the land that's been converted for human use, especially deforestation. And we are living well beyond the safe operating space in relation to land system change. A fourth boundary is freshwater change. And the focus that we're looking at here is the alteration of the freshwater dynamics that regulate climate, maintain ecosystems, and support really the fundamental conditions required for people and societies and ecosystems to thrive. The two variables that they're honing in on in relation to this boundary, they refer to as blue water and green water. The blue water is the water that we can see and use. It's in our rivers, it's in our lakes, it's in our underground aquifers. And then the green water is moisture that's stored in the soil that the plants used and rely on to grow, and that helps drive rainfall through the process of evaporation. We're living beyond the safe operating space in relation to that planetary boundary as well. The next planetary boundary is biogeochemical flows. That's a fancy name for the disruption of nutrient cycles that regulate soil fertility and the health of water ecosystems. And what we're seeing is a disruption because of the use of excessive fertilizer and other forms of pollution. And the two variables that are being tracked in relation to this planetary boundary are focusing on the cycles of nitrogen, and phosphorus. And these are essential nutrients for life. And the nitrogen boundary that is being measured is focusing on how much reactive nitrogen humans are introducing each year, mainly through fertilizers and also through the use of fossil fuels. And the phosphorus boundary that they're looking at has both global and also more regional dimensions in relation to it. The regional dimension focuses on how much phosphorus is flowing from the land into freshwater systems, while the global one is focusing on the concerns that we have of this transport of phosphorus into the oceans. And both of these boundaries are being substantially exceeded, substantially transgressed. A new boundary that's been transgressed just this past year, at least according to the measurements, is ocean acidification. We've seen the fact that increasing carbon dioxide absorption into the oceans is making it more acidic, so the pH level is changing, becoming more acidic, and this is beginning to threaten marine ecosystems. And one of the key ways of measuring this is looking at how difficult it is for marine organisms that have shells and skeletons that are made from calcium carbonate, how difficult it is for them to generate those shells. And we're seeing it's becoming more difficult, and we're living beyond the safe space for acidification of the ocean now as well. In relation to the song, atmospheric aerosol loading, that's the air pollution side of things, the concentration of those fine particles that are released into the atmosphere that have an influence on climate, but also a significant influence on human health. We're actually living within a safe operating space globally when it comes to that. Now, regionally, locally, there are some places where people are living in an operating space that is not safe. But globally, we're still within a safe operating space. When you look at the amount of aerosol that's present in the world as a whole, the current global averages are remaining within that safe operating space. But it is that balance, that global balance, is masking those regional deficiencies. Another area where we've made progress lately, and where it's really a success story for how we as a planet can address an ecological challenge, has to do with stratospheric ozone depletion, right? So the thinning of the protective ozone layer is what is the focus here, that shields us from that harmful ultraviolet radiation from the sun. The key variable that they're measuring here is they're tracking the amount of ozone that's in that layer in the upper atmosphere. Thanks to the work done by the folks that put together the Montreal Protocol back in the 1980s, and Margaret Thatcher played a big role in that, by the way, we phased out those ozone depleting chemicals like CFCs, and the ozone layer has actually been recovering. So it's remaining within the safe zone, but that recovery is fragile. That recovery is uneven, and there's pressures being put upon it now through increases in nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, which can put pressure on the ozone layer, as well as, and we probably didn't think about this one, increasing space activity puts pressure when you're constantly blowing through the ozone layer. This increasing space activity, that also puts pressure on the recovery of the ozone layer. Another planetary boundary is what's called novel entities This is really things like synthetic chemicals, plastics, other human-made materials that are being put into Earth's systems. And this is really looking at all these things. And we have a growing and complex pressure being put on the Earth by materials that we really haven't taken the time to measure what the impact of those materials is going to be upon ecosystems and upon human health. So these synthetic chemicals, heavy metals, plastics, radioactive materials, these are genetically modified organisms. All these things are a part of what's being measured with novel entities, and we're living well beyond a safe operating space when it comes to these novel entities. When you have, a plastic spoon's worth of plastic in your brain, you're living beyond the safe operating space. That's just one example of this problem. So, as we reflect, so those are the 9. So 7 out of 9, we are living beyond the safe operating space. 2 out of the 9 were within the safe operating space. And that is not sustainable. You can live beyond these planetary boundaries for a period of time, but you cannot sustainably live for a long period of time outside of these planetary boundaries. So as we reflect on these 9 planetary boundaries and the fact that we're currently just transgressing 7 of them, it's important to consider that the ultimate test of the value and overall effectiveness of any economic system is whether that system is enabling us to live within the planetary boundaries of the Earth. That's the ultimate test of the value and effectiveness of any economic system. And it's clear that our current global economic system is failing this test. That doesn't mean it's all evil, that it's all wrong, but the way that it is currently functioning is hurling us beyond these planetary boundaries, hurling us to an unsustainable future. The concept of sustainable development is a concept that's been around for a long time. It's been around for some time. The concept was first fully defined and developed in the 1980s at the Commission, the World Commission on Environment and Development. And that commission was formed and chaired by a Norwegian prime minister by the name of Gro Harlem Brundtland. She's kind of a hero in the sustainability movement. This commission actually ended up being known as the Brundtland Commission, and it developed a report in 1987 when I was a junior and a senior in college, and this report was titled Our Common Future. And in that report, it defined sustainable development in this way, quote, "Sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs." The report, Our Common Future, and its definition of sustainable development helped pave the way for a number of international documents that some of you may have heard about, a number of agreements about economic justice, ecological sustainability, and climate justice, including the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were published in 2015. You probably heard of the Earth Charter, you probably heard of the Rio Declaration, the Kyoto Protocol, a number of different agreements that came together based on this understanding of sustainable development. So in the midst of all the concerns that we have within society, the economy obviously is a concern. We lost 23,000 jobs or 27,000 jobs this month. Taxes are a concern for all of it. The deficit is something we are concerned about, our national debt. In the midst of all that, we have constantly ignored the more pressing issue of whether our current forms of economic activity can be sustained by the carrying capacity of the planet. We're overshooting these planetary boundaries. Unless and until we address that fundamental issue, we will not be able to avoid both the ecological and economic collapse that will happen at some point in the future. And that's why it's so important, so critical to look at these planetary boundaries and to stay within them. We're at a critical point in human civilization's relationship with our one and only home, a point where we either understand that we have to live in balance and peace with each other and with all of life, or we will see this be a century of suffering like no other. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are many things that we can do to move ourselves back within those planetary boundaries. We just have to have the moral and political will to do so. You may have heard just recently that there's an actuary institute at the University of Exeter in the UK that looked at what would happen if we allowed temperatures, global average temperatures, to increase to 3 degrees Celsius beyond the pre-industrial average by 2050. Their conservative estimate of what would happen if we allowed that to occur is that in this century we would see 4 billion human deaths related to climate change. So that's what is at stake when it comes to staying within these planetary boundaries, and that's just one planetary boundary. That's the climate planetary boundary. So let us have for the sake of all life, may we have the moral will, the political will, the moral responsibility, the moral courage to find new and sustainable ways forward. Our closing thought comes from Johan Rockström. He writes, "We are witnessing widespread decline in the health of our planet, but it is not an inevitable outcome. The drop in aerosol pollution and the healing of the ozone layer shows that it is possible to turn the direction of global development. Even if the diagnosis is dire, the window of cure is still open. Failure is not inevitable. Failure is a choice that must and can be avoided."